Story 1. The happiest child. The shoes of a sharply dressed detective emitted soft tapping onto the dull concrete floors of the facility. Papers were clutched tightly, wrinkling within his grip. His expression was unreadable, his voice just as stoic and monotonous as always. So far, it seemed as though this was just another crime case, one that could easily be addressed. However, the one evident feature that made the atmosphere more unsettling than usual were the worried and anxious expressions of the co-workers. The man lifted a hand, speckled with age, his slender finger outstretched in the direction of the projected screen. This was a child that went missing 6 years ago. The image displayed two children. One was a boy no older than 11 or 12. Scraggly, ginger locks cascaded down his forehead. His blue-green hazel hues were squinted by the bright grin stretching his pale skin. The shirt he wore was a vibrant shade of orange, with some sort of utility store logo. He appeared to be quite healthy and well looked after. The other child was a girl, her greasy sepia-brown hair pulled tightly into 2 pigtails. She wore a long-sleeved, wrinkled article of clothing and appeared loosely fitted. Her skin was naturally tanned, no freckles adorning her skin. Her expression was a wide-eyed small smile, with strange green-gray hazel eyes that had some sort of eerie glint to them. Her cheekbones were very defined, with a small and scrawny figure. With both children side by side, the contrast between them was as clear as day. Everyone in the dull, gray room hitched their breath, the tense atmosphere suffocating everyone in the room. The president himself was pointing towards the young girl, but the familiarity of the other child was painful to everyone in the room. The agony only seemed to worsen every time this specific image would be rediscovered once again. The claimed tragedy has been dubbed with the name of the Gemini incident. The man slowly retracted his arm from the screen, gray eyes observing the room behind thin-frame glasses. I acknowledge that many of us have been working restlessly with this situation for a few years, but as of recently, more evidence has been laid out in front of us, and with that comes more questions. There's now even a possibility that the more recently unexplained murders are linked to this. The room silently watched him set down a slightly crinkled sheet onto the table, one that even has its ink smudged in certain places. This was the original police report of the young boy in the photo, claiming the alleged disappearance of the girl, Faith Chevrette. The tan-clad male slid the paper in a smooth motion towards one of the workers, a firm frown permanently printed onto his face. "Mr. Aaron, may you do the honors of rereading this document for us?" The wide-eyed ravenet let out a few flustered noses before nodding quickly. "Yes, sir," he quietly responded. Mr. Aaron delicately held the papers between his fingers, silently organizing them in order. With a few vexatious moments of anticipation, he cleared his throat. The crowd in the room kept their gaze on him as he steadily read the old report. Pennsylvania State Police, Case Gemini Incident, date of report Feb. 18, 2012. Witness claim information Cameron Laurie Jones, 13 years of age, the 3rd of July 05, located in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. My friend went missing just a few weeks ago. Her family hasn't seen her in days. They really miss her, and I think I have a few details on her before she went away. My friend's name is Faith Maria Chevrette. She really likes it when I call her Gemini, so I'd like to refer to her as that in this thing if you don't mind. She lives with her mom and dad down in Taneytown, which is a bit far from where I live. They're both really nice. Her mom likes to smother her with attention, while her dad spoils her constantly. It's a little strange to see her act unhappy with her parents. You see, Gemini has lived here in Pennsylvania for a long time. I befriended her in our private Christian school since she always told everyone else to go away. I was the only one who tried to be nice to her after she snapped at me. I know she has a very different mentality that I don't even understand myself. But I wanted her to feel as though she wasn't alone. She never really looked happy anyways, but I know she enjoys writing and doodling. I'm not good at writing, but doodling's pretty neat. Gemini usually wears this one dark fuchsia long-sleeved shirt that looks really old. She needs to buy a new one. She wears another long-sleeved shirt underneath, only it's longer, thinner, and it's a very light green. Then she also has dark green gloves, but she says that she's just a little bit afraid of germs. I remember splashing her with ocean water, and she cried the whole day and was so mad at me, even if she really loved the ocean. Gemini has brown hair and likes to wear pigtails. Her eyes are a weird strange of green, and she claims it makes her like a cat. She always says strange things. I think her disappearance has something to do with her medicine. Her family thought she looked so unhappy that they went to a small little market that I've never even heard of before to purchase something called antidepressant pills. She texted me that it looked like a small brown shack that smelt like cheese. It was the only supposed pharmacy in Taney Town as far as they knew. One half was yellow, and the other half of the pill is orange. They looked normal, and Gemini would take maybe 2 or 3 a day. At first, there wasn't really any difference, but after a few days she was all smiley and happy and really enthusiastic about everything, like she actually wasn't being self-focused and actually listened to me talking about my lacrosse games. She was really happy, but she began to change. She began to drift away from art and writing and began liking law and justice. Gemini still really liked the ocean. She even had an interest in death and said that there's something kinda cool about it. I don't like it at all. Then Gemini began to smile more and more and become more happier. She was like a sun. She became more outgoing and peppy, and then we kinda began losing touch. She was talking with the more popular kids, and she actually began to hang out with them because they thought she was cool, even if she looked weird. Maybe she lied about it. She's a good liar. I guess Gemini became friends with all of them, except for this one girl. Her name was Amber Schneider. Amber was really pretty and really smart. I think she thought that Gemini wasn't honest, and it was strange of her to appear. Even if she's my friend, Amber was right. Gemini being popular is weird. Amber then began talking behind Gemini's back and spreading little harmless rumors about her. They were kinda funny, actually, but apparently Gemini heard them, and she was okay with it. It was surprising how calm she was about the situation, or how calm I thought she was. A few weeks later, Amber was found in an alleyway close to our school, really hurt. Like someone said that she was barely even breathing. All of the kids in our school were asked by policemen about Amber. I was let off the hook, and Gemini was too. I still think that Gemini has something to do with that. I think I only got really weirded out when Gemini began to drool one day after lunch. Gross orange stuff came out of her mouth, and she was shuddering Her eyes were wide and crazy. I asked the teacher if I can take her down to the nurse. She said yes. So I went down with Gemini. The nurse said it must be a side effect of her pills. The entire time, Gemini was just covering one of her arms with her sleeve. Nothing else happened for the rest of the day. I noticed that over time she stopped talking to the popular kids, and they stopped talking to her. She was really quiet and didn't even talk to me. She isolated herself and read a bunch of ocean books and law books or something. Her drooling and spazzing got worse. I even saw her at lunchtime once taking 5 or 6 pills. It was crazy. I guess the day she went missing, a week after winter break, she just looked so shaky and rabid that I kept watch after her without her knowing. I was kinda acting like her in a way, trying to learn everything about everyone. The reason I followed her was because she didn't go to the exit of the school. Instead, she walked down a hallway. When I looked down a few moments later, I felt kinda sick. Gemini was crouched over, coughing up more orange-yellow liquid, and her voice sounded so strange. It was really scary to me, and I felt paralyzed when looking around the corner. Her body was changing in a strange way. It was much more slouched, much more bony, much more sharp. I screamed, and she turned around. Her eyes were wider, and her pupils were large. Her eyes were so animalistic, and I didn't even know what she was. It growled and jumped towards me. I ran away down the hall and out the school and told one of the teachers. One went to investigate, but apparently there was nothing but the gross orange vomit. They said I probably had a fever. I convinced my dad over the weekend to send me to another school. Even if I haven't seen her since, I don't know where she is, mister. Aaron let out a breathy sigh, mindfully placing the sheet down with extreme benevolence. The entire room was struck with silence, as they feared to speak without permission from the detective. However, there was one individual who mustered up the courage to respond. Mrs. Johnson placed a hand down on the table, her expression contorting to one of fury. She was always a woman of her own belief, and a newcomer to this job position. Sir, after the innumerable times of rereading the document, I'm coming to the conclusion that everything written in it is utterly ludicrous. You can't blame the poor boy for the incomprehensible grammar, but it seems as though he's watched too many sci-fi movies. This is completely unrealistic. The middle-aged man flashed an icy look towards the smaller co-worker, gritting his teeth. Mrs. Johnson, I'm afraid to say this is only the original report of her disappearance. There is other evidence to provide that could develop new theories and enforce the fact that she's potentially dangerous. The ambitious woman kept her brown eyes low, but her chin up high. She placed her arms behind her back. Sir, you do realize that an adolescent witness is suggesting that a form of antidepressants are physically morphing her into what he believes is a monster. It's asinine. Surely someone else can concur with me. Another series of dull, agonizing seconds passed by just as Mrs. Johnson herself was losing her confidence. An elder man stood up, pushing up his glasses. I must side with Mrs. Johnson on this one, sir. I'm sure any evidence you have could provide us insight on her whereabouts and her current mendacious behavior. But do you really believe she's a monster? The detective turned his back to the extended table, quickly meddling with the projector and his computer. With a booming voice, he spoke. His ignorance was prominent. Last week, just 2 days after the murder of Veronica Adams, There was a murder in Donovan Hotel. The victim's name was Jessica Booker, age 29. She was accused of drug dealing, but was excused from trial and let loose without any charges. These Maryland murders have a certain theme of people being accused of crimes, yet evidence of them being the criminal are disproven. He pulled up a video file on his laptop, showing the thumbnail of rather high-quality surveillance. Lifting up his wrinkled hand, he tapped the projector screen. This is the only surveillance of any of these strings of murders. If it's the same individual committing mass murders, then this is who it is. The head worker brought his hand down to maneuver the mouse to the play button, clicking it to begin loading the clips. Donovan Hotel Surveillance, July 6, 2018. Camera 18A, 10 p.m. The hotel floor showcased practically useless information. A buff man in a large overcoat loudly sauntered down the hall with a duffel bag, entering room 22. It appears as though he is blind, using his cane to navigate. He shut the steel door behind him. The thud of what is presumed to be his bag impacting the ground is heard. 8:34 p.m. The door to room 27 swings open, showing a ruggedly dressed mother and her 3 kids following in pursuit of her, waiting for the elevator. They excitably hopped onto the machine, giggling noisily as the woman attempted to lull them to silence. 8:36 p.m. A woman is on her phone, laughing and talking to the person on the phone. She's neatly dressed, and her high heels loudly clack against the ground. It takes her a while to find the right key to room 23 in her purse, but eventually stumbled upon it. The lady enters the room. 9:09 p.m. A different lady with a rose tattoo on her left shoulder enters the scene. She's easily recognized as Jessica Booker with her dark, thin locks of hair and her crimson lipstick. She appeared rather stressed, sighing dramatically and quite loudly in the hall. Jessica ceases her tracks in front of room 29, the furthest down the hall and away from the elevator. 10:57 p.m. The blind man previously mentioned had left his room to peer out his door, only to return back in. It is unknown to what he had heard or what disturbance he had detected. 1:34 a.m. The lights of the humble hotel have been shut off in the halls, the only light being in the elevator. The doors of the elevator open, ringing out in the hall. A silhouette of a small, scrawny figure with pigtails is seen standing firmly with a bat. The rest of the details are enshrouded by the light source illuminating behind them. They dart off to the side, crouching down in the darkest corner of the hall. They wait for a few moments. 1:43 a.m. The figure begins to crawl down the hall, silently tiptoeing down the hall. They give off the impression of extra precautions and crossing paths with the door of room 22. They stop at the door of room 29. They pull out an item that is too dark and tiny to see in the shadows of the hall. The figure crouches down on one knee, fiddling with the door lock. The elevator light illuminates against the figure, revealing a yellow mask. The details are still concealed from camera view. 1:49 a.m. The sound of a click is heard, and the figure swings open the door, impacted with light. Now the camera captures direct view of the culprit. It was a child with greasy and ragged brown hair pulled up in pigtails. A bat was clutched in dark green gloves. Their clothes were loose-fitting, wrinkled, and tattered with dirt. The mask they wore was a yellow, basic smiley face encrusted with a maroon liquid. They immediately bolted into the room. A few seconds later, A girl screamed, and the noise of wood cutting through the air ended with the aftermath of a clamorous thud. 1:51 a.m. An animalistic growl can be heard off-screen, along with the sound of cloth being torn apart. 1:52 a.m. Room 29's door was slammed shut by a large, ominous, and inevitably inhuman arm. The sound of glass shattering within the room accompanies it. The footage comes to an end. The host of the entire meeting turns his head towards Mrs. Johnson, who is her hand over her mouth. Her thin eyebrows furrow, chocolate brown eyes scanning the screen. Confusion was the only emotion that could cross her mind. The elder man was rewarded with the usual fear-stricken silence once again. Unfortunately, the shattering is the noise of a window breaking. The child must have broke out to escape without a trace. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the missing child was the one present in the Donovan Hotel. He straightened his posture elegantly. I too have the theory that it, in fact, is Faith Chevrette, though my main concern is the fact that she doesn't seem to look a day over 13 years old. A few chuckles bounce around the gray walls, making him raise his voice. My theory does continue. Ms. Chevrette was mentioned to take a prescription for antidepressants, and upon further research in Taneytown, the described pharmacy company does not exist. These drugs may not even be antidepressants at all. As phenomenal as it sounds, I believe there is a hidden laboratory making experiments that could change human beings. Mrs. Johnson slowly nodded her head, her gaze lowered. It seemed highly difficult for her to process any of this, or for anyone in the meeting grounds. Every living soul confined in this space has the impression that the sharply dressed detective was a madman. He casually approached the table and collected his papers, accepting the certitude that no one else had the desire to continue with the discussion. He let out a breathy sigh. You all are dismissed for tonight. It's late. I suggest you all go home and keep safe. All and sundry collected their items, fussing about as they collected. One by one they chattered as they left the room. The man was taking his time, resetting his projector and closing down applications on his computer. One investigator stayed behind and approached him. Sir, if it's not too personal, could I ask a question? Yes, you may go ahead. He pushes his steel frame glasses up as he continued to type and meddle with his device. The boy was he your son? The man froze at the question, finally looking down to his co-worker. He let out a hearty sigh, clasping his hands together. Cameron Jones was my son, Mr. Aaron. He was great at sports and a very good student. Never stayed up past curfew. Do you remember the case on him before Mrs. Johnson ever joined the investigation unit? The man nodded slowly, a solemn frown spreading across his face. Yes, actually, I remember very well. I'm sorry it happened. Mr. Jones waved it off, dismissing the melancholic response. No, I've shed the tears I've needed to shed. His passing was anomalous, though. Cameron was found in his bedroom with large claw marks, mutilated. It was as if a large bear climbed up the side of my home and broke in through the window. It was just bizarre, Mr. Aaron's head angled downward, unresponsive. He had no words and never expected such an answer. When he felt pressure on his shoulder, he looked up to the man whom he respects as a leader. The detective flashed the younger worker a smile, bobbing his head. You best be going, son. Like I've previously mentioned, it's very late, and he should return home to rest. The ravenet began to walk out of the room with his bag of belongings, adjusting his dress shirt collar. He grinned. "See you tomorrow, sir." Mr. Jones placed his hands behind his bag, sustaining his smile. "See you tomorrow, Harris. Keep safe." The ravenet's eyes were heavy-lidded with exhaustion, trying to keep his eyes on the road. The only sound was the humming of the cart tires smoothly gliding across the recently paved pathway, a rhythm that would lull anyone to sleep. Mr. Aaron's eyelids fell heavier and heavier, his vision blurring. Thud. The air was cut tensely as the humming was jumbled into asynchronicity, and the male jerked awake to slam down harshly on his brakes, panting. His heartbeat accelerated its normal pace, making him clutch his plaid dress shirt. After taking a breather, he shakily fussed with his door handle, staggering out of his car to look in front of it, investigating what had impacted the bumper of his car. Light groaning was heard, the voice sounding like it belonged to a teen. Mr. Aaron, being a tender-hearted young lad, hurried over to the body. "Oh my God, kid, are you okay? Are you who?" He stopped speaking when the figure slowly stood to its feet, looking down at the ground. Brown, thick logs looked like string attached to the scalp of the teen's head, pieces of loose hair covering her rabid-looking face. Her clothes were tattered and blooded, a mask hanging down from her neck. Her hands were twitchy, bony, and large. They appeared as though they were claws of a species yet to be discovered. She grinned widely up at the man, her teeth lacking care for what looked like to be years. Her dark hazel eyes were ominously half-lidded. "Salutations and farewells, sir." With a quick motion, she popped off the cap of a prescription bottle, drowning herself with a large overdose of pills. The putrid little cylinders dissolved in her mouth, making her foam a sickly yellow color. She only kept smiling, almost thrilled about this whole ordeal. Her eyes never left his. Mr. Aaron didn't hesitate to rush back into his car, locking the door. He attempted to start his car, but the engine whined and went out, making his curse loudly. The small girl patiently awaited in front of his car, her slender claws folded around a worn-down wooden bat. The ravenet decided to finally resort to pulling out his phone. His thumbs flew quickly across the screen as he shakily dialed the authorities. 911. "What's your emergency? I need help." He trembled, keeping his terrified blue orbs on the small girl, who now had a golden-orange liquid leaking out between her rotten teeth. He averted his gaze from the sight. "There's this menacing girl out in front of my car, and I think she's trying to harm me." "Okay, sir, remain calm. We'll track your location. Do you have any self-defense weapons if she attacks you?" "No." "Boo." An idea immediately crossed Mr. Aaron's mind, his eyes shining with icy determination. "I'm gonna hit her." "What?" "I'm gonna go out and stab her with a windshield wiper." "No, sir. Stay put. Don't hit the child and stay in the car." The young male dropped down the cell phone, looking up from his seat. However, when he looked, his heart halted its own rhythm. The girl was gone. She was nowhere to be seen from his view, the feeling of dread washing over him. Before he could even process any more due the situation, a figure shot up from the side, jumping on the front window. The sight of the creature made the man scream. It was thin, bony, and lanky. Its jaw appeared to be unhinged, a slimy, yellow liquid drizzling down from its two sets of razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes were beady, sunken, and Although the eye sockets were large, stringy hair was distinctly tied up in pigtails, only lessened. Horns curled out from the roof of the monster's mouth, the ends of it as sharp as a blade. It lifted a sharp talon and brought it down harshly upon the glass, cracking it. Mr. Aaron shot out an arm to the door handle, frantically trying to pull on it. The pounding against the flimsy glass synchronously matched the sound of his heartbeat, cold sweat breaking out on his brow. The door wouldn't unlock, no matter how many times he tried. He began to try and pry the door open, screaming for help. The final sound of glass shattering made him look up, as several shards of glass were the last thing before his vision darkened. It would unfortunately also be the last thing you would have ever seen. Pacing the room of the headquarters was Mr. Jones. His thin lips were compressed into a line. His wrinkles due to age were furrowed with an indescribable grief. His eyes dart to the crinkled, fragile sheet of paper, a police report and form written long ago. The detective's vision began to blur, his breath wavering as his fingertips ever so slightly dig into the crumbling sheet. His tone was full of painful nostalgia, but a fury for vengeance to a phenomenal degree. Like she said, there's an end to everyone, which would mean she is also included. Mr. Jones turned to face the monitor, his expression full of icy determination. And I plan to bring her in closer than it would be. Story 2. The huge kata. Turn back now, before your past is dug up like old bones, and your soul is consumed in fire. I blinked once, watching the faded trees, like twisted, gnarled fingers reaching up to caress the sky, roll by the carriage window. I rubbed my forehead. The thought must have come from sleep deprivation, an earnestness for the trip, and what I could find at the manor. I was nearly robbed of sleep last night, no matter, for I was almost there. The thudding of the horses' hooves and the irate commands from the driver started to abate as we neared closer. I snatched another glance out of the window, noting the barren, almost lifeless ground, and the withering forest surrounding it. A thin, dirt path wound up a hilly slope stapled with the macabre trees on either side. But the only destination seemed to be the moon, which sat at the zenith of the hill like the top ornament on a Christmas tree. I pulled my head back in and ruminated on the good fortune I was coming into. I rubbed my hands gleefully, understanding only one thought that encircled my heart and soul right now: treasure, lots of treasure. Suddenly I heard a horse whinny and snort, then pound its hooves on the ground. I heard a shower of pebbles cascade loosely down the path. I leaned out the window and saw a wide, tall gate, shining like black silver spikes underneath the silvery moonlight. The two horses, only dark shapes in front of me, stood still and rigid now. The driver was shouting for me to leave. He would go no further, not into this accursed land. It's because he's a local, I thought with a smirk. In the mountains of Germany, the village folk thought every blasted place away from the town was haunted or contained what they called poltergeists, and that was some hog shit. The suitcase dangled by my waist as I entered the pitch-black void making up the swirling land of trees and decaying weeds dotted to either side of me. The driver lowered his arm as I came by, opening his palm and flashing a patent smile. I dropped a few corns into his hand and watched as he brought it to his face. He snatched a lamp next to him and counted them meticulously, whispering as he did so. He nodded to me soon after, then shouted a command to his horses, the carriage turned around, and with that I was alone in the darkness and the shearing cries emanating from the forest. My ears pricked, they sounded like my brother's voice. Could it be? No, it couldn't. I dismissed the thought like one would bat away a fly. I walked to the gate, ignoring my surroundings. If you were a treasure hunter, you forged an iron wall between yourself and the outside world, and you honed in on only one thing, and that was treasure, money, gold, the damn Spanish doubloons, if you found them, and all those days of walking tirelessly, baying carriages and captains, rooting through dank cellars, smelling of death and decay in the end. It was worth it. It was worth it because the money was so good. The women were so good, and the taverns, the alcohol. A thought invaded my head again. It wasn't so good for your brother, now was it? A word formed on my lips, but I dare not say it. That word was a name, Rand. I trembled for a second, shaking like a coward kitten from a lightning storm. Why remember that now, here. The gate swung open as I touched it, revealing a cobbled path snaking its way up to a cloud of darkness. Lightheart Manor stood up there somewhere. The driver had laughed when I asked him where it was. We were standing in the streets Munich, underneath a tall lamp post standing guard above us like a sentinel. The bright yellow-orange light illuminated me as if in a spotlight. At the top of the hill, the driver said as he coughed, is all darkness. Follow the path and you'll see it. He laughed hoarsely and grinned terribly. If you make it there, that is, that need not concern you, I answered. You'll take me at once, you'll pay extra, as promised. This is not a faint-hearted trip, stranger. The topic of his resignation intrigued me. What concerns you so about said manner? Evil stranger, and deplorable screams as if muttered from the witch of hell herself. He shook his head and coughed again. Missing men. No one has ever been known to come back. Very well, I said, with no hint of trepidation. Some ill-fit men and childish screams won't chase me away like a kicked hound. That was some time ago, I thought, hours ago. It seemed like a century. Laboriously, my feet carried up the path, eating away at the pebbles which skirted down behind me as my boot kicked into the congregated piles of loose rock. A streak of lightning flashed above, a blue ribbon which illuminated a lone house at the pinnacle of the hill. It was brief, but I felt like I could see all I had wanted to see. Lightheart Manor was as big as they said, but not nearly as big as my imagination had led me to believe. It covered the top of the hill completely, its wide shape stretching awkwardly out to form an irregular rectangle at the bottom. But it didn't extend far vertically. It ended with the confluence of both sides of the roof combining to form a V. A thought struck me suddenly. The air was dry and damp, and no hint of rain showed in the dark skyline above. Yet the lightning had flashed. Why, I found myself standing just outside the manor with the question unanswered. The entire house was made out of rotting wood. In turn, wooden poles jutted down from the roof of the house to the porch floor, and the door was destroyed, lying in broken splinters on the ground in front of me. The house loomed above like a baleful signal of death. This is nothing, I told myself. Nothing. The heap of splintered wood, and the darkness beyond it. Nothing. Just old stories, handmade tales and yarns to scare children. With a little more confidence, I stepped over the heap and into the doorway. The thought of treasure alone propelled me into the dark confines of the house. Slowly and steadily I carried myself into the realm of empty space. My feet seemed to crash on the boards in front of me, and they creaked under my weight, groaning like old, battered soldiers. A breeze tickled my ears and swept its way inside. A faint scuttling emanated from the upper floors of the manor. Besides that empty silence, realizing I needed light, I struck a match and lit a small lantern I kept in my suitcase. The light filled only a small circle in front of me, like a barrier from the malevolent forces inhabiting Blightheart Manor. The rest of the darkness spanned around me like a cloak, obscuring everything until my circle of light touched it. The feeling of death and emptiness was palpable, but I scoffed at the sheer thought of it. I had been in places worse than this: prisons, abandoned castles, deep in the darkest corners of the ocean. I carried on, kneeling to inspect the map I carried in my shirt pocket every now and then. A man had shown me how to read it. Back when I was touring America, he had been an odd, Native American fellow, with a swoop of long black hair tied in a ponytail. He hadn't said much, besides make an additional mark on the map as to where it could be. Then he had walked out swiftly and been on his way. He never explained how he could read it, or how he had known where the treasure would be. The foolish man hadn't even asked for his share. Wren would have questioned it. I mused as time draped on in the darkness. He was always the smart one, always prudent, always looking ahead for the both of us. Because it had always been the both of us two, brothers in arms. There had been no one else. A faint scratching noise sounded from behind me, like nails sliding roughly down wood. I jumped and looked back. Nothing was there. I kept going, meandering through what I assumed was the kitchen. My light fell on heaps of wood bundled together, rotting and dry now. A half-broken table stood almost upright, slanting on to legs. A counter raced around the edge of the room, filled with gaping holes, but still standing upright, holding up against the passage of time. A square window looked out into the realm of stars sprinkled on the horizon. I edged closer to the window, dropping the lantern to my waist. As I did, a movement echoed behind me, as if someone was trying to sneak up behind me. I whirled around and flashed the dagger I kept inside my cloak. I held it close, but looked back at nothing. I had been sure something was behind me. The soft steel glinted dangerously, and I shook my head and lowered it. I set the lantern on the small table and sighed. I kept the dagger in my hand and knelt down. Under the slanted table in the kitchen, the Native American had said, is where you'll find a trapdoor. Open it. The bolt may be rusty, but hit it a few times. Go in there, and you'll see a narrow hallway. Follow that, and you'll find the treasure. It was indeed rusty, so I hit it until it popped the latch off. The steel on metal met with a few sparks and a loud, gawning noise I wished hadn't accompanied it. With a groan, I finally lifted the trapdoor, which swirled up trails of dust mixed with a repugnant smell. It smelled like burning flesh. Wren would not have come, I thought. I know he wouldn't, not after this. He would have told me to go back, wait until the morning. Except I wasn't the smart one. I wanted my money, and I needed it now. That was the extent of my intelligence. I looked down, seeing a ladder collapsing down into a cellar of more darkness. It had rusty rungs, but it looked like they would hold. I tapped one with my foot for good measure, and smiled in satisfaction It would hold all right. As I prepared for my descent, I heard a whisper drift toward me. "Baron, where have you been?" The first thought I had was Wren. The second was that whatever it was on top of me. I whirled around and lunged with my knife. It sunk into rotting flesh. Appalled, I scooted on my back and knees, attempting to free the knife from the corpse standing in front of me. But as I looked up, I met the face of my dead brother. He smiled at me, but it was not his smile. He looked at me with his eyes, but they were not his eyes. His teeth flashed, but they were not his teeth. It was Wren's corpse, as it was the day he had died. It was wearing a tattered white shirt, ripped open at the belly to reveal a gouged hole in his stomach, crawling with flies and dripping blood. Its intestines hung out like a platter of meat, and an axe was lodged into the exposed hole. Wren's hands gripped the haft of the axe, those two smeared with dry blood. Its skin was peeling off in layers, exposing white, gleaming bone and motes of decayed flesh. Its face had no color, no texture. It was a pallid hue, with black holes where eyes should be. His hair was matted with blood. "You miss me, brother?" the corpse asked. Its voice sounded like a bewitched child, and almost like an old man on his deathbed. He flashed a toothless smile, and maggots crawled out of his mouth and slugged down his belly. Flies buzzed around him, and the smell alone almost rendered me unconscious. What are you doing, Wren?" I said, shaking with fright. The knife impaled in the corpse's chest would not budge. I dropped my hands and let it sit there, another weapon lodged in the ghastly creature. "Getting my dues, brother," the corpse hissed. "You killed me, you killed me." It shrieked the last few words, resonating a deathly sound that made me clap my ears. As it did, I flicked my eye toward the trapdoor. If I could escape down there and shut it before it came and escape. But something other than terror gripped me where I stood before the entity. "You're not my brother," I whispered. Then, with renewed vigor, "You're not my brother." I tried to shout, but it still came out as a hoarse whisper. The thing turned its eyes on me, boring into me with those back holes where eyes should be. A slimy maggot crawled out of the hole and traced its way down the corpse's rotting skin. It moved closer, and I could hear every step it took pounding on the rough-hewn boards before me. It cackled maliciously. It was taunting me. I was shaking in fright. "Lord, rid me of—" I started and stopped as the corpse suddenly lunged forward and gripped my head in his hands. Up close, I could see the tearing and rotting flesh, the jutting bones, the red meat clinging to it, and the maggots swallowing and eating it whole. The smell of decay completely engulfed my senses. I closed my eyes, crying and shouting loudly for the Lord to save me, to no avail. "The Lord will not save those he deems evil." The thing hissed once again. "You killed me, brother." He held my head up to his eyes, and then all I could see was blackness. His chest heaved up and down spasmodically, almost like his heart was threatening to pump out of his rib cage and splatter its remains across the bare white bones. I watched with a silent grin on my face. Betrayer, snake, worm. His face was turned up to the ceiling, and his breath strummed steadily. My toes grabbed at a soft bit of wood on the cabin floor as I eagerly eyed him. I inched forward, and now I dragged the small farmer's axe up to level with my head. Tucked underneath his arm was the map. It almost seemed to light like a beacon for me, almost seemed to say, "Come get me." And I deserved it, didn't I? I deserved that map, because I had remained loyal despite his traitorous urges. I had remained the good brother. I had remained. The map glowed. It became all I could see, and I howled in fury. How could he hide it from me, the greatest treasure of all? And he dare call me his brother. We were not blood, we were enemies. I raised the axe up, and with no pity, no remorse, it fell and fell and fell. Blood sprayed everywhere in a jet-like stream, and he cried out at first, but then was silenced as the blows slammed into his stomach, the curved edge of the axe burrowing into his flesh like a mite. My eyes snapped open, only to find more darkness. I stood up, my knees wobbling as if skating on thin ice. My hand traced along the wall to the side of me. It felt cold, rough, and jagged. I realized it was rock. A small hole opened at the top, and I could see the stars reflected through a window, and a ladder raced to the top. I was in the trapdoor, but when had I fallen down here? I must have fallen down and had a nightmare, I told myself. Just a nightmare. It felt better now to believe that none of this happened, and had only been the pure imagination and figment of my roving mind. Suddenly the door swung shut with a snap, rendering me in total, obsolete darkness. Wine, nothing left any more but to go, I thought grimly, and still, despite everything, despite the nightmares, whether true or not, the treasure was here. The treasure lay here, waiting for me to find it. My tongue flicked out, as if it could taste the texture of a golden chalice already. No ghosts of my dead brother or horrid dreams were going to stop me. I had done all for this treasure. This was my life's dreams, and nothing was going to stop it. Nothing. I plodded down the cavernous hallway. My boots sunk through puddles of water, and sometimes I heard the faint splish-splash of water echoing, but nothing else moved. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and the sense of treasure lay somewhere ahead. I could almost feel it. I had imagined the whole thing. That was all. Figments of imagination. I'll find the treasure, and I'll get out of here, I muttered to myself. You'll find nothing but death. The voice sounded like it was inside my own head, but it was alien, inhospitable, and leaking of a macabre quality. Who is that? I shouted, ringing my voice through the hallway. Nothing stirred, but I stood still for a second. Suddenly everything seemed alive, and I could envision my brother, his dead, pallid face grinning, blood dripping down his stomach, running down the hallway and laughing like a madman. I picked up my pace, fully understanding the situation I was in now. A bat fluttered by me, almost knocking me off balance. I batted it away and continued to run. I could almost feel its hand on my skin now, turning me over to stare at those lifeless eyes again. My legs ate the ground, meteorically flying over the ground. My breath was stertorous, lagging in and out as I flew across the rough, cavernous floor. My foot slipped, and I went skidding down a puddle of water, landing face first on the rocky ground. Blood trickled down from a cut somewhere on my forehead. Groaning, I turned up, flinging my hands out to reach something in the darkness that could lever me back up. My hands touched something slimy, something alive, and something crawling with maggots. I shrieked, retracting the hand at the same time I started to crawl backward. My brother was back. It was pitch black, and I could only hear the thing's raspy breath as it slowly plodded toward me, but I knew that horrendous face was jeering at me. The maggots were still crawling in and out of the bones on its skin, and blood and meat glistened like gems underneath the sunlight. Lord, save me. Lord, save me, I whispered over and over and over. The Lord has abandoned you. How could it be in my head? What was it? My back hit a wall and sent a jolt of shock through my head, sending out waves of unrelenting pain. I hobbled to my feet, noticing the thing's breath had disappeared. For the first time, I was thinking of denouncing the treasure. I fumbled for my pocket, looking for a match. If I could find that, I could make my way out of here. Even if I was lost, I could backtrack, trace my path. Fingers rubbed across something wooden and small, and I grasped it. I hauled the box out as well, flicking the match across it until I was rewarded with a spark and then a gust of flame. The light penetrated the darkness, revealing a snarling face grinning at me, only inches from my own. I screamed, but my cries were lost in the tenebrous cavern miles underneath the ground, where no one would ever find me. It wasn't my brother's corpse this time. It was a gangly creature with brown, fleshy skin, poked with scabbarded black slime and red pores. Its limbs narrowed to the point where white bones peeked out from the gangrened flesh, but searing. Sharp claws extended at the top of the toes, and monstrous hands. It was twice my height, but I could still see its head shaped like a canine's as it jutted forward, but with yellow eyes, tealing layers of brown skin, and not a trace of hair anywhere. It snarled again, revealing glistening white teeth that were hard not to distinguish in the piercing darkness. I slid down, defeated in the presence of such aghast horror. "Doubly what eye is it?" I whispered to myself, unable to take my eyes from the ghastly creature. "I am the Ujkata. I am death if you choose it, but I am fire if you light it." The voice still resounded in my head, clear as a bell. I clutched my head and wailed. "Please, please no," I said, hoping it would just go away. I closed my eyes in silent prayer. I sat there, staring at his dead corpse for what seemed like millennia. The hours ticked by, but I continued to watch, fascinated, as he lay there, still and silent like a stone. I should feel pity, remorse, but I didn't. He hid something from me, and he paid. Was that not God's retribution? Punish the sinners, punish them until they flee into hell, the lost and tormented souls flocking like sheep into the fiery depths. My fingers, blood-stained and soaked, held the map tight to my chest. Yes, nothing left but to get the treasure, hide his body, or leave him for the wolves. It didn't matter what happened to the dam. The only thing that mattered was treasure. As I laughed, I knew one thing for sure. If he hadn't died, we would have had to split the treasure. I opened my eyes again and looked at the thing standing there, watching me like a stone gargoyle. "No," I commanded, "he deserved to die. You have no right to." Its claws gripped my shirt and hoisted me until I was level with its eyes. I looked into the layers hidden beneath those eyes, but all I could see was my brother's death, flashed over and over, until I could make out exactly what he had said when he died. "Brother, I love you, please stop, please don't, oh God." And then it was running, towing me behind like a discarded piece of rope. The creature dragged me on the ground, ignoring the ceaseless bumps as my head cracked against the rocks of the ground, splintering my head and releasing torrents of blood. Eventually it stopped, and I felt the thing drop me on the ground. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a cavern, lit by an army of stalagmites glowing at the top of the cavern's ceiling. I stood up, shakily. The ground seemed to wobble and shake incessantly at my feet. I corrected myself and leaned against the wall. My eyes scanned the place until I saw the chest. It was sitting atop a litter of bones piled high in a stack, like mounds of rubble in a bombarded town. Forgetting all that had happened, I leapt and bounded for joy, rushing to the treasure. The creature had given up. For some reason or another, it didn't want to eat me. And that meant the treasure was mine. I licked my lips again, imagining myself on a beachfront cabin, swinging lazily on a hammock, as servants tended to me with golden chalices, and surely the same ones I would find in that chest. I thought of nothing but the thought of letting those gold coins slip through my fingers, the thought of staring at golden lockets and losing my eyes in a sparkling gem or ruby. I clambered up the pile of bones, ignoring the incessant bones slipping and falling underneath me. I fought my way to the top and looked in wonder at the chest that alone would grant me a fortune. Eagerly, I grasped a lid and hoisted it up, unlocking whatever lay hidden inside. What stood before me was not treasure, but my brother. This time, however, it was his ghost, a rippling, almost fading, dreamlike aura of him. The figure shimmered back and forth, a white hue glowing from his body, but no traces of wounds or death marked upon his body, or showed he had died at my hands. My brother held out its hand. "Come here, brother," he said. "Come to me." In a paralyzed stupor, I went to him, wrapping my arms around his ghostly body. I only noticed the cold, however, the immense, freezing cold, like I had dipped my body in the Arctic Ocean. I shivered, but I felt at home. I had already slipped away by the time the ghost faded, and the creature held me in its arms. Story 3, Suspiria. Prologue. A beast with no name. The snow did not even whisper its way to earth, but it seemed to salt the night with silence. Dean Koontz, brother odd, winter's bitter chill drifted in from the open window. Frost laced the dried wooden frames of the window-sill and empty countertops, still littered with verglass painted pots. The harsh burn of the coal clawed the walls of his throat, biting at the lining of his lungs and firing at the center of his chest. His brittle lips split as he opened his mouth to take a drink from his canister. Blood stained the frost, coating the stubble on his jaw. He could feel the freezing water glide over his taste buds and settle down into his stomach, temporarily easing the exasperated burn. The mountaineer looked down at himself as he leaned against the dilapidated wooden wall beside him. His bright orange thermal coat had been torn. Blood oozed out through the stuffing and soaked into the fabric surrounding it. His hands were scraped, torn bits of skin hanging off from where the elements got to his exposed flesh. His knees were blooded with small pebbles embedded into the skin from his rapid climb up the mountain. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. Whether that was because he had lost too much blood or it had gotten too cold out, he didn't know. A shrill howl sounded out from the woods, riding along with the eerie breeze of Ingazodig, or, as the tourists called it, Suspiria. He understood now why it had been nicknamed that. When you sat still and listened to the wind, really listened, you could hear the voices. He didn't know who the voices belonged to. He didn't care much to find out. The sighs and whispers drifting in through the haze gave him comfort. If he was going to die, at least he wasn't going to die alone. He wondered how many people before him had sat in this same shack and heard these same voices. The shack, why was it up here? He looked around himself at the glaze-coated surroundings. The shack wasn't much bigger and a school classroom. The walls were made of a dried wood with cracks and holes peeking out between the boards. Two big windows sat at the east and west of him, the one he was closest to having been shattered across the shelter's floor. A worn rug with faded red wool woven into the middle sat in the center of the shack. A broken table and two chairs sat at the north end of the cabin. The chairs pointed outwards towards the slanted door of the shelter. They looked solemnly towards the exit that allowed death to sweep itself in on the white speckled wind. Two tin cups sat frozen to the wooden surface of the table. The rim of their folded metal was lined in crystals and the faint brown tint of dried blood. It was lacking, but it gave him leave from the storm outside. As long as he wasn't going to die lost somewhere on the side of a mountain, he was fine with dying in a secluded cabin. Another howl carried in with the wine, this time closer than before. It was tracking him, probably following the smell of his blood. God damn it, he muttered through gritted teeth. The man pulled himself up to his feet, placing one hand on the wall behind him to help steady himself as he stood. He didn't have the energy to run anymore. Even if he did decide to run, he had no idea where he was going. He'd be lost in the snowstorm raging outside in a matter of seconds, easy pickings the lurking beast. The man hobbled over to the table, clenching his jaw, the throbbing coming from his abdomen and knee. He had no idea how or when he hurt his knee, but whatever he had done to it, it sure was biting him in the ass now. Each deep inhale he took made his throat fire up in parched protest. The man threw himself into one of the empty chairs resting either side of the table and fished around in his survival pack for a pen and paper. Though the sensation in his fingertips was dulled, he could still faintly make out the thin spiral lining of his notebook. He pulled it out, placed it on the table, flipped to the next clean page, and retrieved a pen from the front pocket of his bag. With some pressure, the silver-sprayed plastic clicked into place, breaking through what thin layer of ice had formed around its edges. It took him a few moments to work his hand into the position he needed to hold the pen properly. The stiffness in his knuckles made his fingers awkwardly curl around the pen's base in what would serve as a weak grip. With a few scribbles along the margin and some light pressure, the ink ran free onto the paper. To whoever it may concern, I'm writing this while sitting in a cabin located somewhere on the east side of Engazodig, or, as some of you may call it, Suspiria. I understand now why the townsman nicknamed the mountain that. While I sit here and await my untimely demise, I can hear the sighs ride in with the wind. The inaudible voices mutter phrases that I don't understand into my ear. Though it's ominous, in some strange way, the gentle whispers provide me with a sense of comfort. I wish I could fade off listening to these voices. I wish I could lay down on this table, rest my head in my arms, and slowly drift off into the abyss as the cold overtakes me. I wish I could die of dehydration or starvation, or perhaps even simple infection. But alas, the beast outside draws near. This letter will be my final contribution to this world. I pray that you read it through, whoever you are, before venturing further into the banks of Suspiria. My name is Clark Wright. I was born in Florissant, Colorado, to Wendy and Alan Wright. I have two older brothers, Jack and Gerard, and one younger sister, Josie. I'm 42 years old. I have a wife and two little girls. The youngest one is Belle, and the eldest is named after her mother, Ingrid. I'm a self-proclaimed mountaineer explorer, and I have an unhealthy addiction to Lil Bigo's fruit snacks. I climbed up this mountain with a group of my closest friends, Larry Ford, Harrison Wolf, Jerry Springhouse, Marcia Richards, and Mark Sefnek, in hopes of reaching the top within a couple of months or so. We hired ourselves a guide, a nice man named Namito Wobi. Everything had gone all right for the first 2 months. Every night we would huddle together in our tents and sing to our heart's content any song that reminded us of home. John Denver, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson, Fleetwood Mac, you name it. At the time it seemed a simple gesture to remind ourselves what would be waiting for us back at the bottom. Now I think it is that lead the monster to us. It all started with Mark saying he was off to take a piss. 2 minutes, just wait 2 minutes, he said. We were required to carry a bright orange extension cord with us at all times, so we could follow it back should we wander off. Mark tied one end of his cord to the base of a small pine and walked off into the white. 1 minute passed, 2, then 3, 4, 5. Mark never came back, but the cord just kept going, kept shaking like he was still walking further into Suspiria. We hollered out into the wind, calling his name, flashing our lights and pulling at the cord. No response. Marcia took first in following the cord off into the snow, and the rest of us trailed behind. It took 15 minutes for us to finally reach the end, or more so the abrupt end that shouldn't have been there in the first place. The cord was chewed off, thin tangles of wire and thick orange plastic hanging out in frills where whatever had gotten to it gnawed through. A small collection of blood blotched the snow in front of the cord. The center of the puddle was slowly melting down deeper into the cushion, its crimson shade stained, signifying that the blood was still warm. We looked around the Alp for any signs of where Mark could have gone. He even ventured further off into the wild in hopes of finding him. Maybe he just hadn't realized his cord had snapped. Maybe he just thought he still had more leverage and kept walking without realizing his safe line had been broken. Who's to say the blood and the snow was his? Mark. Marcia called out. Nothing. Not a single goddamn thing. We were informed beforehand of the very likely chance one of us may die along the trek to the summit, but Mark's disappearance struck an uneasy chord within us all. Of course, him being gone in itself was very upsetting and weighed heavily on us all, but there was something else to his sudden absence that haunted us from behind the crowded tree line of the mountain. Something about that chewed off the end of the cord end that just didn't seem right. I realize how stupid it must sound now that I'm reading the words in front of me, but there's simply no other way to put it. It's one of those feelings where you just know. We headed back to camp once the sun started to lower itself behind the peak's frosted tips. It was a unanimous agreement to begin our descent back down the mountain immediately. Marcia seemed most affected by the suddenness of Mark's mysterious fate. She was the first one to discover the broken cord after all. When we arrived at the scene, all she did for the first few minutes was stare aimlessly out into the flurry. Her eyes seemed glazed over like she had somehow gone somewhere else while looking off into the veil of snow. She wouldn't talk for the first 2 days of our descent, aside from informing us she was going to go pee or that she needed a refill of her water. It wasn't until the third night of us pitching our tents behind a small formation of boulders that we finally heard her speak. She sat in front of her bright red tent, knees pulled up to her chest and distant blue eyes glued to the ground in front of her. It never stopped. She mumbled, Her voice was just barely audible against the whistle of an exotic zipping over the mountainside. "What?" said Harrison in return. "The cord. It stayed stretched out like he was still walking the entire time until we reached the end. It was as tight as a rope when we started, but it went slack right before we found that it was chewed off." She was right. None of us had noticed it at the moment, or perhaps she was simply too in shock to comment on it at the scene. But the cord had indeed gone limp when we reached its end. What about the blood? It was only a few dots nestled together at the base of the cord. If he was hurt, where was the trail? Where were the tracks? The path in the snow of where he wandered off after the cord stopped. The rest of us fell silent. Where were those tracks? It was as if he just vanished into air, swept off by the never-ending wind. If he was gone with the wind, was he watching us now from some unseen, cloud-topped fortress? Our silence continued throughout supper, as we settled into bed, and all throughout the next day, as we thought of just what may have happened to dear old Mark. As we passed tree line after tree line, we began to see things. Paranoia seeped into us all, burying itself at our cores as we watched the blanketed branches for the monster that took our friend. Eyes reflecting off of our flashlights in the dead of night, footprints in the snow beside our camp, misplaced bags, and water bottles, a burning gaze that followed us wherever we went. It never stopped. We were going crazy. Namito would sit outside as the embers of our fire died long after we all went to sleep, staring off into the mountains as if he were waiting for something. He'd have his axe in one hand and a lantern in the other, sitting silently, unmoving, and blinking, waiting for whatever was to come out of the trees and present itself to him. One night I crawled out of my tent to join him. I asked, "Namito, what are you doing? What are you looking for?" All he did was shake his head and mutter for me to go back inside. I tried to follow his gaze off into the night, but all I could see was the faint, luminous reflection of the moon against the snow in the forsaken black of the woods. Then, one morning, he was gone. We awoke early and crawled out of our tents into the crisp fog that draped itself over the mountainside to find Namito was nowhere to be seen. He left no tracks, no blood, no signification of where he had gone aside from his axe still sitting lonesome next to the spot he perched himself the night before. He left no map, no sense of direction, no bright orange cord leading off into the wilderness, no supplies, no note of farewell. He took his pack, he took the flare gun, he took the rest of our climbing rope, and he took our hope. Whether he left of his own accord or the beast got to him, I'll never know. In hindsight, I wouldn't blame him for leaving on account of the events that would happen next. With no guide and a second missing companion, we were left to wander aimlessly along the mountainside. All we could do was hope we were still going in the direction Namito had led us upon. Marcia had gone silent again. She trudged along quietly in the back of the group as we made our trek back towards base camp. We had taken our cords and tied them together, looping them through our carabiners to keep us close to one another. Every time she stopped and slumped down into the snow, we'd feel a heavy tug that would lurch us backward. 4 times this happened until finally she said she couldn't go any further. Her feet ached, her hands were numb, and her heart to even number. Larry simply couldn't handle it any more one day. He marched over to her and pulled her up by the collar of her jacket. "Damn it, Marcia, we don't have time for this." His voice boomed, piercing the almost deafening silence between us. It echoed off the white walls around us and down into the trenches beneath, carrying itself across the land. In a small outburst of frustration, he threw her up over his shoulder and continued forward. He hauled her for what seemed like hours, stopping every now and then to collect himself before throwing her back over his shoulder and carrying her again. The entire time she kept her gaze focused at whatever blank canvas painted itself before her. We tried to persuade him to stop and put her down to rest, allow himself to breathe while we made camp. But he just kept going, kept trudging through the knee-high snow. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks. Sweat collected on the inside of his shirt and around his hairline. His lips became cracked and brittle, blood seeping out whenever he stretched his lips to speak or drink. They gained a faint blue tint towards the center, and as time went on, the hue spread itself to the outer corners of his mouth. His fingers no longer stretched out the way he wanted them to. The pain in his knees from the constant weight subsided into a faint tingle as the cold seeped in. Larry didn't die at the hands of whatever monster was prowling around us. He died in the dead of night from exhaustion. While the rest of us slept, he took his final labored breaths before ascending to whatever life lay beyond. The next morning, we took what supplies remained from him and buried him the best we could under a lonesome pine tree. With only Harrison, Jerry, Marcia, and I left, a new challenge arose between us. Marcia had completely shut down. She had no will left to keep going, no smile to be shared, no voice to speak with, no spirit left within her. It seemed she had left us, though she sat beside us the whole way. As much as I hate to say it, she was becoming a liability. We thought about leaving her, stationing her under the next tree he found, and giving her what little supplies he could spare, but such acts would be inhumane. She was still our friend, after all. She was still Marcia Richards, mother of to an esteemed photographer. This trip was not only supposed to be a way to get her motivation back, it was also supposed to serve as an opportunity for her to snag some once-in-a-lifetime pictures. Throughout our trial, she remained completely unresponsive. And then it happened. It was dawn. The flamboyant colors of the sunrise began to paint themselves over the horizon, dancing and twirling around the clouds, bringing life to the depressing gray that filled the sky. A peaceful silence had settled over our camp, and for once I didn't feel the watchful eyes of the beast burrowing into the back of my mind. Her scream ripped through the air. It was a cry full of terror and pain, filling the space with a sense of dread and panic, racing over the mountainside and bouncing off cavern walls. I was paralyzed where I stood for a few brief moments, startled by the thrashing and muffled growls coming from Marcia's tent. Cries and shrieks of anguish, as well as gargled pleads for help, began to fade just as quickly as they had started. We burst out of our tents and sprinted in her direction once our bodies allowed us to become mobile again. Her tent lay torn and in shambles, ripped right out of the ground and cast to the side. Bright crimson trials streaked the barren landscape from where she once lay. They lead off further into the mountain, with heavy indents of where she and whatever was dragging her had been. We plowed through the thick blockade of white, and our throats quickly became dry and stung at the sharp bite of the cold as we shouted her name over and over again, though no matter how loud we yelled or how much we pushed ourselves to go faster, she and whatever beast had claimed her disappeared into the mountain. The only thing we found left of Marcia was her detached arm torn straight from the socket wedding ring still stationed perfectly on her ring finger. We went from hopeless, to angry, to confused, to scared shitless in a matter of seconds. A brand new kind of fear settled in deep, and suddenly exhaustion didn't matter anymore. We turned back and ran towards the camp as fast as we could. We ignored the burning sensation and cramps that formed in our thighs and feet as we quickly threw together our supplies in a panic scramble. It didn't matter what direction we were going in anymore as long as we were going down. To hell with the safety cords. We bounded down the side of the mountain as fast as our feet could fly. Jerry and Harrison were in front of me as they had lighter loads than I and were quickly beginning to disappear off into the haze of Suspiria. Wait. I called wait. A sickening snap echoed back at me, followed by a pained cry. Jerry had been zipping through the snow so fast he'd send himself flying in short leaps as he strained to get ahead. He had landed wrong on his ankle, snapped it backward, and sent himself tumbling down the mountainside. His body thwacked hard against the rocks dotting the slope we bounded down. He smacked into trees, boulders, logs, flew over hidden caverns, and slid down snow-covered passageways. The fall itself was enough to kill him. Soon the grotesque sounds of his flesh colliding with the earth faded off into the white the farther his corpse rolled away. From behind, a shrill screech sounded out across Ingazodig. It was too high pitch to be human, and too loud to be of any earthly creature. It bellowed and shook the very mountain we stood on as whatever was began to leap across the banks towards us. We couldn't see it. We couldn't hear its paws plowing through the snow towards us, but we could feel it. It was another instance of where you just know. As we passed by the bottom of a steep ridge surrounded by pine and rock, I quickly cut to the left and took shelter behind one of the formations. Harrison continued ahead without even noticing I wasn't behind him anymore. I'm sure it was only minutes after I'd stopped, but it felt like hours before the beast behind us drew near. I could hear its heavy breaths escaping from whatever ghastly maw served as its mouth. Hot, heavy, lined with a faint undertone of wheezing, they came closer and closer. Strained growls escaped its throat that sounded more like a suffocating cow. Whatever served as its hands and feet dug deep into the ground underneath it and propelled it along. Thundering booms sounded as the beast slammed down into the snow again and again. It slid right past me, its feral howls fading further and further off into the direction of Harrison. I don't know what ill-gotten fate fell upon him, whether he died at the hands of the mountain or the beast. Either way, I pray he didn't suffer long. As soon as the monstrosity seemed far enough off, I began to scramble back up the slope in hopes of losing it. Rocks and wood dug deep into my hands as I clawed my way up, puncturing through my gloves and nipping at my skin. The snow whipping around and the wind felt like spiteful needles pricking at my face in scorn that I had evaded the creature. I'd dropped what supplies I'd carried in my scramble to safety, hoping I could somehow throw myself up Suspiria faster. Below me, the creature's shrill cries rose up from the depths. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to break through and flee from what abomination lurked below. My lungs flared, throat scorched. My very core throbbed in a sharp stabbing pain from the dry mountain air I was forcing in. The more I heaved, the less air I seemed to be getting into my lungs. The harder I had to focus on getting myself up the ridge, the more my muscles burned and cramped. I lost myself somewhere along that mountainside. At some point in my scramble for life, I was no longer present. My body went into autopilot, and the pain faded off into the cold. I didn't feel the fear anymore. I didn't feel anything anymore. It wasn't until I found this shack and managed bust open the door from its frozen hinges that feeling finally returned to me. It came in like a wave and knocked what breath I had in my lungs back out through my throat. The only supplies I have with me now are in the backpack that stayed on my shoulders throughout the climb. I'm too exhausted to try and run now. Even if I could, I still have no idea where I'd go. I'd be lost in the wilderness in a matter of minutes. I can see it now. It's lurking just outside the cabin walls, staring at me through the spaces in the wood with yellow eyes. To whoever reads this, remember my name. Tell the world what horrors took place on this cursed mountain. Turn around and never look back. This thing, it isn't earthly. It's a demon of the snow, Christ. It may even be the devil itself. It'll smell your blood for miles. Heed the words of a dead man. If it doesn't already know you're here, it will. You're better off finishing it yourself than waiting for it to finish you. Best of luck, Clark Wright.